All right, everybody, welcome. This is Con Carolinas, and this is the Supernatural panel. And we're going to be talking about our very favorite show.
Hi, I'm Teresa Glover. I'm the author of the Caitlin Kelly Monster Hunter series from Falstaff Books, and I'm also an editor at Falstaff Books and a member of Authors Essentials.
Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Jaffe. I'm the author of over 40 novels at this point, best known for the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries. Also write the Nathan Kay action fantasy series, the Paranormal Society series, and a whole bunch of other fantasy and science fiction.
And I'm Gail Z. Martin. I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, post-apocalyptic fantasy, and more. And then as Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. And I think it's safe to say that for all of us, we write worlds where Sam and Dean could walk in and feel right at home.
Yep.
So what drew you to Supernatural, and how did you find it? How long have you been part of the family? Stuart? Go ahead.
Teresa?
I had a really good answer.
Go for it.
I blame you, Gail. In real life, Gail and I circulate in very common circles, so we see each other quite a bit. And if anybody is not familiar with Gail, she is probably the biggest Supernatural fan on the planet. So she was always talking about it. And when I finally got to the point where I wasn't working a bajillion hours and in school and trying to write, I finally said, okay, I'm going to check out this show that she keeps telling me that I would love and see what this is all about.
There you go.
I was a late comer to it, so I think I came in at around season 12, and I think I got through most of the seasons in about 4 months, and then because I just lack focus, it took me a while to get through what else is available on Netflix, and now I'm kind of annoyed that season 15 starts at episode 9 on the CW.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me, I started way back with season 1. My wife and I were big fans of X-Files, and it had ended, and there was a gap in our lives looking for something to fill that, and this show came about, and so we thought, we'll give it a try, and we got hooked and pretty much watched it ever since. There was a period there where we dropped all cable, and Netflix hadn't quite gotten the rights yet, so there was a gap there. But once they did, we caught up and have been enjoying it ever since, and are anxious for the final season to be done, so it'll be on Netflix, so we can see what the heck happens.
Yeah, I came late to the party. I started about halfway through season 11. People had told me that I would love this show, but I don't get to watch a whole lot of TV. And so it took a while. At the time it was first airing, I had 3 kids under 10. I didn't see anything if it wasn't on PBS Kids or Nickelodeon. So I didn't get to watch grown-up shows. And so I had some catching up to do. And the first episode just hooked me. It was like, where have you been all my life? And so we binge watched 11 seasons in 4 months, so I could start live tweeting the show when it came on season 12, and that's how I got to know the Lynn Zubernis from Fangasm and the Winchester Family Business blog people, and the rabbit hole just went from there. But the wonderful thing is I haven't fangirled about something like this in so many years, and it's just kind of turned all the lights back on in a really exciting way. So I'm just unabashedly fangirling this thing. Who are your favorite characters?
So many. It's almost easier to say who I don't like. Who do I like? I like Crowley, early Crowley, before we can talk about that later, but before he changes but when he's a real mean, scary threat, I really found him interesting. Bobby is hands down one of my favorite characters. in all his incarnations.
My favorites are definitely Crowley, Rowena, and Dean. I have an affinity for the bad guys, and Chuck is probably right in there, close to the top as well. But they're definitely my favorites. They're the more interesting, in my opinion, when you get complicated and a little evil.
Just a little evil.
Just a little.
Yeah, I usually say I identify with Dean, but I married Sam. And you know us. That's kind of true.
It is.
But beyond Sam and Dean, I love Charlie. I love Jody. I love Bobby. And poor Kevin, he just wanted to finish his AP classes and get into college. I mean, that's really all he wanted. And you gotta love him. So yeah, there are so many wonderful characters, even if they haven't been on very many episodes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a special touch to make them so memorable. I mean, Jeffrey Dean Morgan as John Winchester has only been in 13 episodes, but he looms over all 15 seasons. So, I think special.
Yeah, and one of the things they do really well is they take even those minor characters and they develop them. Like Donna. Donna started off as like kind of a bubblehead, but then you see her grow and become, more herself and more secure and more well-grounded in an identity that she didn't have at the first time we see her. So like even treating those minor characters as real people makes a huge difference in the impact that they have in the show and on the viewers, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Well, and even Jody, she didn't start out being a hunter. She was just a sheriff who got thrown into something way over her head, and she rose to the occasion.
Yeah, I think that's also a recurring theme, I'm sure, tonight is that the writers do such a great job. And you probably know better than I do in this, Gail, but I'm pretty sure Jody, that character was not initially expected to be what it became, but she was just the sheriff of the town that they were having an episode about. And the actress just hit it out of the park, and people really reacted to the character and were like, gee, I hope we see her again. And so then they tried it again, and then suddenly, it blossoms into something that was so strong enough that they at least got a shot at a spinoff. That it didn't go well, but that's another story.
Well, Jim Beaver, who plays Bobby, was only supposed to be in 1 or 2 episodes.
Oh, is he one also? I didn't know that.
Yeah. He really only expected to be in 1 or 2 episodes. And honestly, Misha Collins says that he really thought he was only going to be in a couple of episodes. And he had no idea he was going to end up being around for 10 years. And that if he had known, he wouldn't have talked like this, because now he has to keep doing it because his own voice is
right.
Which is kind of funny, because his natural voice is a lot higher, but Jensen's natural voice keeps going lower and lower and lower. And I've heard him in real life. He does talk like that. So yeah, you never know with this show. So do you have a favorite season or a favorite story arc?
Well, there are so many, but I do know that one of the ones that more recently that I really responded to was when they had the parallel world where everybody was still alive, but it was this, but Michael had taken over. It was a really horrible kind of almost post-apocalyptic kind of thing. And that they took what could have been just a gimmicky thing that would not have worked well, and just been an excuse to trot out everyone's old favorites like Bobby and their mother and stuff like that. And instead they turned it into what became, I think, a really powerful and and meaningful season for the characters that has lived on beyond that season, things that have happened there.
I would agree. Like the apocalypse storyline is probably one of my favorites. The other is seeing how the boys took on Jack and were kind of like parenting him as if, you know, making up for the lessons that he had learned raising Sam. Because you see a lot of anxiety that Dean has about the things that he has done wrong by way of not knowing any better. And it's almost like he was making up for it with Jack right up until that moment where he just couldn't make the switch and give that forgiveness in season 14.
I loved the Demon Dean and Mark of Cain arc. Just because Supernatural loves its mirrors. There are so many things, you know, Sam had the demon blood addiction, but then Dean became a demon, and he was kind of high and mighty to Sam back in the day, but then he kind of got his comeuppance finding out with the Mark of Cain what it's like to be controlled. Sam's been repossessed more times than an old Ford, but Dean's had a few times around the block now to know what that's like. And I just love the way the show, many of the things that they did in those first 5 seasons, which of course nobody ever expected the show to run this long. The running joke is they only had 5 seasons to start with, so obviously somebody made a Crossroads deal because they made it to 15. Where'd that 10 come from?
Right.
Those things come back around so that the shoe is on the other foot. And I think that leads to a lot of the new maturity that we are seeing both of the boys have in, especially 13 on, where, I mean, it's a good thing that they didn't keep writing them like they were 25. These guys are 37 and 41. You know, it's nice to see some maturity. But I love those heroes. I
think it's funny, both an amusing but also an interesting way, that, yeah, they are, in the show, they're pretty much their actual ages, but we still call them the boys. You know, and I mean, it's part of it's just a funny, endearing thing, but it's also, I think, it's something that's in the show that Bobby and all these people would actually, if Bobby's character was alive, he would see them as the boys, and
that's
they're
what
the
everybody
brothers.
calls them.
Yeah. But and Jody call, you know, they're not high men. It's, you know, come on in, boys. And like I said, oh yeah, and in some ways, although she does it in a very condescending way, a lot of times.
So beautiful.
But I think that really reflects that these characters, they're growing, they're maturing as brothers and as human beings, but there's something, I think, because the character, though the actual actors are married and have kids and have matured into adults in that sense, these guys never will have any of those normal things. So in a way, it's not that they're stuck in immaturity, but, you know, they're in their late 30s, early 40s, and they're still running around shooting things, you know?
If you have seen any of the con videos or any of the gag reel, yes, they are adult men with families. On the other hand, Jared likes to make Misha mess up his lines by taking his shoe off, stretching his leg out, and feeling up Misha's crotch with his foot while Misha's trying to give his very serious lines. Nice. This is not a one-time occurrence.
I didn't know that one. I did know that. I don't know if they still do this, but a long time ago, when they had to be in Baby in a driving scene, you know, and so they're sitting on a set, that if they broke for lunch, they would eat the most horrible things to try and just stink up that car and force each other in that kind of a situation. So yes, they were they have their immature side, definitely.
Well, my all-time favorite outtake is the Eye of the Tiger scene. Like, that just won me over 100%.
Yeah, that is a fantastic scene. And we have now seen, well, you haven't seen season 15 yet, but we do get to see Dean sing. It's amazing how much he's improved on stage. And then we actually get to see him and Garth dance. Also an amazing sequence. So definitely something to look forward to. Yeah, there's a comment that Jensen made. I think it was about the episode Baby, which, everything takes place in the Impala. And they hooked up all the cameras on one of the functioning Impalas. And so they didn't have to have all the crews and everything. And they sent them out on the road, just him and Jared. And Jensen pointed out that car goes very fast when he wants it to.
Well, we know it goes really fast because they can cross the entire United States in like hours. I mean, timeline stuff like that doesn't really matter in this show. It always amazes me how fast they get to wherever they need to be.
Yeah, one of my friends in high school's parents had an Impala, and it was not a 67, but it was probably it was still of the vintage that had the big engine. And I know from personal experience that could go much, much faster than you're supposed to drive it. So Supernatural started with its horror roots. And if you go back to seasons 1 and 2, before we got into angels and demons and apocalypti, what's the plural of apocalypse?
Multiple apocalypses.
Any thoughts about some of those early horror episodes or favorite monsters of the week?
Well, I loved it. I mean, again, I started watching from the beginning. So for me, it was just a monster of the week thing. And I had no expectation that it was going to become anything more. In fact, I can remember when they first introduced the idea that there were angels, and you saw those wings burned in the ground, and you're just like, oh my, it just blew your mind away. But up until then, yeah, it had just been a monstery thing, but they'd been really good, creepy ghost stories. And they reminded, actually, I said it filled the X-Files gap. There was a show in between called Millennium with Lance Henriksen. Excellent show, by the way, if you ever get a chance to see it. And that was much darker and just kind of creepy. And it captured a lot of that mood. The demon with the yellow eyes and it's amazing how many things they set up in that they, as you said, they weren't planning to go as long as they did. So they kind of, for better or worse, stuck with it. So it's not even episodes. I just remember moments from those first seasons, like the first time somebody took a goblet and drained blood into it so they could talk to the devil. Or Lucifer, I guess it was, and you're just like, what? Because now, yeah, we've been doing that for decades in this show. But at the first time these things happen, it was so unexpected that a show was going to go there. So I loved it all.
I really enjoyed that because, that was kind of what I was writing at the time too. So it was like, oh, this is really parallel, and this is a lot of fun to see somebody who's already done it. So, how can I take this and make it my own, or how can I learn from this and do it well? So that was always cool. And, I'm a big horror buff anyway. I like scary stuff. I like the gruesome, grisly things that you see on screen. So people are freaking out about, like you were talking about, the cup of blood to talk to the devil. I was like, oh, that's so cool. And and seeing the different things that they've been able to do, like one of the first images that really kind of sucked me in, and I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to watch all of this, was seeing the image of Mary Winchester, or I think it was Mary Winchester the first time, in the flames on the ceiling, or it was Jessica.
Oh, yeah.
I forget which one shows up first, but seeing that, I'm like, okay, we're going to watch the whole seasons, all the seasons that there are, and we're going to see what happens with this, because this is interesting enough to keep me engaged.
I have loved ghost stories since I was a kid. I've always collected books of ghost stories. And so when they had the Woman in White, and they had the Phantom Hitchhiker, and they had Bloody Mary, and I'm going, oh yeah, this is my people. This is my tribe. I'm right where I belong. And, it is something I think is really interesting with this show is that every monster or entity that they use actually has to have a basis in real legend. They can't just make something up out of whole cloth. Now, there's wiggle room and they can adapt it, but you have to be able to look it up and say, oh, this is a real legend, which I think kind of grounds it in a little more believability. And even when you get into some of the things like the Enochian, the angel language, that has a whole historical history. So even the alphabet is, there in the legend, which I just find fascinating because that's my rabbit hole. I will go down those forever.
It was also because I learned about the tulpa the first time on the show, because I was like, that is probably the coolest monster ever. It's a thought form and it can come and just wreak havoc. I am in.
I also, while it's nothing new as far as bad guys go, the very first times they dealt with the Grim Reaper was just, excellent. And again, was really spooky. It was, it was actually the Grim Reapers, although they've done a better job of it, have had the same issue that I have with Crowley, which is when they first come on, all is all they are is the bad guy, and they're terrifying. They're really spooky. There's so much unknown, but because they last in the story, the longer it goes, the less scary they become.
Except Billy.
What?
Except Billy.
Well, so
she
Billy
maintains that sense of intimidation throughout.
Right, and they've done a really good job of pulling that back and making her threatening. And part of it too is in the Reaper case, they're not constantly around either. So there is a lot of implied threat, which Crowley lost, in my opinion. I've said this many times on panels before, but in Buffy, Spike, when he first came on, was like, he was bad. Like, he was not just bad like a villain, but he was bad like he was the guy who killed other vampire slayers. So he was a real threat to her. But by the middle of the run of the show, they had neutered him a lot in an effort to, they made him nice and he has a soul and he's this or he's that or he's, whatever storyline they're coming with. And he lost all of the threat that you forget that he's actually a bloodthirsty killer. And I feel the same way about Crowley. When he first came on, it was like, oh no, this is a real, up until that point, I forget what season he came in, but the boys had defeated this and that and the other and this apocalypse and that, and now it's the king of hell. The only guy worse than this guy is Lucifer. That's the only guy. Lucifer is the only one that Crowley's even afraid of. And then over the course of seasons, suddenly he became a bit of a sad sack for quite a while. And they tried to bring it back, but it was really difficult.
Well, I think part of it was the fact that he was just charmed by the boys. But then, Gail, you were talking about the mirrors that happen in Supernatural. He got addicted to human blood and kind of brought him to a more human level. Whereas, when Sam was taking the demon blood, it made him more demonic. So it's that mirror effect of, okay, well, if you're doing the bad thing, it makes you more bad. So if you're taking something that's more subjectively good, at least, maybe it makes you more good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the creatures like that, when we first meet the original Death, only Supernatural would have old Death and new Death, but
I like
when
new
we
Death.
first meet old Death, and that really dramatic entrance where he's walking down the sidewalk and somebody bumps into him, and then several paces, he just keeps going several paces behind him, the guy just dies. Badass. And then, we find out he loves Chicago pizza, and there's the whole thing about getting Sam's soul back. So I went to one of the Supernatural conventions, and Julian Riching was going to be one of the guests, and I had him in my mind as this very stoic and staid, very serious actor. He skipped out on stage skipped. He's this long, tall guy, kind of like Peter Capaldi in Doctor Who, and he is outrageously funny. There is video of him during this COVID thing reading children's stories, and all I can think of is death, reading children's stories during a pandemic. What could go wrong?
Yeah, for real. Yeah.
But that was, I think I sat there in shock for like the first 5 minutes, just going, okay, this is not at all what I was expecting. Mm-hmm. But he plays that part so well.
And I think they have such a great cast that, I think they have such a great cast that has such a fantastic range, because like Dean, when he was Michael's vessel, the about face that he shows in behavior and the way that he acts, it's like watching a different person. And they've just done such a great job getting people who have such amazing range.
Well, yeah, I mean, Dean has not been as many as Sam has been. But if you think about it, when you watch those segments when Sam is Lucifer or Sam is Gadriel or all of the different things, Jared pulls it off very convincingly to be somebody else. And yeah, both of them do that very well. I'm sorry, Stuart, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, not just them, but if you consider how many supporting roles end up becoming long-term supporting roles, there are, I was going to say, very few to no missteps in the casting of any of their characters. There are very few where I'm like, man, I hope that character doesn't come back, or maybe none. I can't think of one offhand.
There was a definite one, blonde Ruby. If you remember, Ruby started out blonde. That was Katie Cassidy, David Cassidy's daughter. I've heard various things about why she didn't stick around, but it ended up being a good thing for Jared, because Jared married fake Ruby, the dark-haired Ruby. Genevieve Cortese, and so it worked out well for Jared. But
that's not. I mean, unless you're missing or didn't, unless I'm misunderstanding, that sounds like that was behind the scenes drama. I don't recall her on screen being a bad actress.
No, I thought she was an actress, but I don't know the story there. But blonde Ruby disappeared, and dark-haired Ruby was in the next season, and there was definite chemistry on screen between them. That one scene where Jared and Ruby are getting it on pretty much smokes up the TV set. I don't know, someday their kids are going to watch that, and that's up to them to explain it. Of course, they also have joked about having to explain someday why Jared holds mommy while Uncle Jensen stabs her. This is just something you're going to have to explain to your kids someday. Supernatural. So speaking of all that, Supernatural also goes meta fairly often and breaks that fourth wall. And we see a lot of humor in those episodes, both from Jared and Jensen, who really can bring the funny stuff when they need to. Any of the meta episodes that stand out to you?
All of them.
Yeah.
No, they're meta episodes, and they always have a humorous episodes that are sometimes not necessarily meta, but like the Groundhog Day episode they're very well executed. And actually, I remember, because we were probably all at the same con. I know Gail and I were, because Gail, you were like, I think I was saying, let's go out to get a bite to eat. And you're like, okay, but I have to be back at a certain time because Scooby Natural is on tonight. And, and that, I couldn't, that was so funny. That was absolutely one of the best episodes they'd had, the Scooby Natural thing. Just thinking about it's making me laugh.
I watched that one fairly recently, and I just giggled through the whole thing. And then in the next episode after that, Dean says like jinkies or something like that, and Sam looks at him. He's like, are you gonna stop that at any point? He's like, maybe not.
Well, one of the things I love about that episode is it's not just meta to its own show, but it's meta to Scooby-Doo as well. And especially if as I'm sure we all loved Scooby-Doo, and you knew the episode that they were in, then it became, I mean, it's kind of like this meta of a meta, and this, I mean, it was just, it's got very Philip K. Dickish in a way, where it's twisting upon itself in that respect. You know, even so, I think it's right before the show breaks for commercial, where every character is like doing their little like zoinks, jinkies, and all that, and
Yeah.
then Dean Barry's like, son of a.
My favorite one is probably the one where they end up at the convention, the supernatural convention.
Mm-hmm.
That one just made me giggle because, you know, we go to a lot of conventions. We've seen that happen where you have multiple characters that are, or multiple people cosplaying the same character that kind of show up and converge, and they're having conversations. And then the idea of throwing the real person in on that is just, it's hilarious.
Yeah, and we've seen variations of that where somebody has this long conversation with a stranger and they don't realize that they've actually been talking to the author, that they were just saying how much they hopefully like their book, but that all the time. Yeah, I love the convention one. I also love the musical.
Yeah.
Where, because, you know, that could have gone wrong in so many ways, and yet it was respectful to the fandom. And there's that moment when Sam and Dean are watching and they connect their lives with Carry On My Wayward Son, like it's hit them for the first time. And their expression, you know, for what could have just been a frothy little fun episode, there was a lot of depth in that one, and I just love that one.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you hit on something there when you were saying how respectful it was, because even the convention one was very, any kind of poking fun at conventions was done clearly with love of that. And I mean, they're not the first to do something where they go to a convention. There's been plenty of mystery shows where somebody gets murdered at a con, but they're clearly making fun of, you know, they're making fun of the geeks and the nerds that we all are at these things. And you don't get that sense with this show.
It's more of a sharing of the in jokes than it is a making fun of what's going on there. It's like, I see you. It's the wink. It's the nod. It's the elbow in the side going, hey, you've been here. You've seen this. You know what this is like, and not in a disparaging way.
Yeah.
Where the show went a little off the rails with the fan portrayal, arguably, is with Becky, because when we first meet her, yeah, she's kind of a crazed fangirl, and Sam, you're so firm. But she's
like Velma talking about the chest.
Those shoulders, jinkies.
Shoulders, that's right. Yeah.
But she's, you know, then she ends up with Chuck at the convention episode, the writer. And then we get season 7, Time for a Wedding, which is pretty much one of the most hated episodes in the canon. And you've now got this roofying date rape stalker chick. And that one didn't feel like there was a lot of love behind it. But interestingly, and again, something to look forward to in season 15, Becky gets a redemption arc. And I won't spoil it for you, but we do see Becky come out the other side of this and go, oh, good. Now we can like her again. And there's all kinds of backstory about who was writing when. We got that season 7 episode, but hey, 327 episodes, you get a few misfires. Villains, we've touched on some of them. You love Crowley, you love Rowena.
Yes, they're my favorite.
And Supernatural has served up some fantastic ones. Maybe not Dick Roman, but pretty much everybody else had their moments. Who are some of the other ones that stand out to you? Beyond the ones we've talked about.
Definitely Lucifer. I mean, I don't know the actor's name because I'm really bad at knowing that most of the time, but he is just
okay. We got
fantastic.
Gail here.
I love him. I just love his portrayal. I love the sense of humor that he brings to it. He's just great. He's one of those people that you love to hate, and even though you hate him, you can't stop watching him.
Yeah, I'd agree. he portrays Lucifer in, this is going to sound weird, but in a believable way. Like, if there were going to be a Lucifer who's ultimately the ultimate evil, but is there to charm you into selling your soul, he could do it, as opposed to some fork-tailed, cloven-hooved thing that's, it's one of those things when movies, the older portrayals of the devil, I'd be like, well, why would I agree to this contract with something that looks like that? It just screams of, don't do this. But he's like a really cool uncle who's like, come on, don't worry what your parents said. This is going to be fun. Trust me. I'm your uncle. I'm not going to steer you wrong. And the next thing you know, it's 10 years later and there's dogs at your door.
Yeah.
When
and that charm just works in the way he does it too.
And it was fun at one of the conventions. Of course, God and Gabriel are the MCs for most of the conventions. And so they're getting the whole crowd riled up to come out. And you have a ballroom full of people in Charlotte, North Carolina, all chanting, "All hail Satan." I don't know what.
Delightful.
I think two of the ones that I would have liked to have seen more of, Bella. I think she would have just been a great frenemy like Crowley. Not as any kind of a love interest or anything like that, but just somebody who sometimes they're with you, sometimes they're against you. Which is it going to be today? She was clever and smart, and I thought she was their equal in that. Abaddon was interesting. And in one of the later seasons, Ramiel, the guy who didn't really want to be a prince of hell anymore, he wanted to fish, but damn it, if you're gonna come barging into his house, then he'll just, fire things up and go after you. I thought he was interesting. And of course, he only got one episode, but Abaddon didn't get much more. Yeah. But they have some pretty memorable villains. And of course, now coming into the home stretch, we've got God as a villain. And I know you haven't seen what we have of season 15, which is only 8 episodes, so nobody's seen where this really goes. But you kind of have a pretty good idea where it's going by the end of 14. What do you think of this whole God as the ultimate villain?
I love it. I'm so excited for it. Partly, because you have the writer being the bad guy and the writer is God, and that's just fun and meta and wonderful. But I also just like the way that they've crafted Chuck in general. I think that him being the lackadaisical parent coming back and just showing his true colors and putting the smackdown on this world because they've pissed him off is great. I love it. I can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah, no, I like it too. I think, again, the writing, the acting sells a lot of it for us. But it also feels like, inevitable. This is their final season. There's nothing that could be a bigger bad in this show's universe than God. I mean, it was one of those things where the moment it happened, the last seconds of the last episode of season 14, and you're just like, oh yeah, I should have seen that all along, because this is what I mean. From the very first angel that we ever met, the whole thing about angels is the story is that they didn't know. They started realizing they needed some way to introduce angels, because they'd had demons, and they couldn't figure out how to solve it that it would work for the show until the head writer figured it out, and he shows up in the writing room and he says, "I got it. Angels are dicks," and that's how they went from that day forward. So, if that's the case, then that makes God the biggest dick of them all. Well, I was just thinking that I was talking earlier this evening about how, like, Crowley or the Reapers, part of what made them so dangerous is that we didn't see a lot of them at first. And when we did, they were dangerous. So when the next time we encountered them, we had that fear. And of all the characters, God has been the most absent. that his absence has often been something that ticks off Sam and Dean. And so the fact that he's God and that he's, when we've never seen him really mad except for those last seconds where we're just like, oh, I mean, it just lets your mind go, which is what makes them a villain so far more dangerous, is the not knowing how dangerous they can be and having to imagine it because we've been given hints.
It's interesting to see what they've breadcrumbed previously, not knowing how long that they've planned God as the big bad villain. Because if you think about it, not only was he gone, but we had that whole episode where he was talking to Metatron, and Metatron had read, what's coming next and was horrified. And if you think about the books that Billy shows Dean about how their lives end, and so that the story is written, so the breadcrumbs for God being the one behind it and being the bad guy have been there all along. And it would be really interesting to know when they decided that was going to happen, whether these were happy little accidents in the writing and the storytelling, or if this was something that they had planned from a certain point.
Well, and it's interesting because even back in those original 5 seasons, at the end of season 14, of course, we're left with that big reveal. And I did the 14 season rewatch before season 15 started, as one does. And it was interesting knowing what we know now to go back to those early episodes when they had no idea again that it was going to last this long. And even in one of the first 2 episodes where we meet Chuck, where we think he says something to them about, oh, maybe I'm a god. I'm a cruel and capricious god. And you're going, okay. And there were so many places where they may not have originally intended this, but it sure left a trail that they could pick up on. Mm-hmm. And who's left to be the big bad at this point?
Right. I think that's often for series writing is one of those marks of a good writer, is that a good writer learns how to leave crumbs that the writer, him or herself, has no idea what they're actually going to add up to, consciously at least. But you start leaving these little bits in, and then down the road, I suspect they figured out that God would be the big bad well before season 14, but they probably went through several seasons of even after they introduced Chuck, and even after I don't even know if they decided he was God at first or if they realized that after the first episode with him. But at some point early on in the revelation of that character, they figured it out. And from that point on, it was probably more deliberate and controlled than it was before, but they really did. They know, the writers of the show really know how to capitalize on the show as a whole unit of 15 seasons. And I especially I think it's that way because, of course, they had no idea even at season 10 that they would be at season 15. I'm sure there were many seasons they're like, well, maybe we'll see if we get renewed, and they kept getting renewed, and it was their own decision to finally end it. So for all we know, maybe the last 5 seasons they've said, well, if we ever get told we're finishing out, we got this God thing in our back pocket,
Well, and not only the God thing, but the whole tension between free will and predestination has been running since the original 5 seasons, with we're fated to be Michael and Lucifer's vessel. Screw that. We're going to be team free will. And so now it's really no surprise that team free will is back in action, bucking Chuck. So how do you want it to end? There are all kinds of ideas of how it may end, but how do you want it to end?
I don't know that I want to answer that.
Because again, I've been watching this from the beginning. There have been many seasons where I thought, well, if this is the end, and then it wasn't. I've often felt that if the show is true to itself and true to the fans, as sad as it'll be, I think Sam and Dean need to die. They need to be given a death that's significant and meaningful, and ultimately, it's almost like it just made me think of the death of Iron Man in Infinity War, you know, where you hate to see it, but you realize, I mean, these boys, first of all, they've thwarted death way too many times.
Multiple times.
But they deserve a happy ending in death, if that makes sense. They've got to die, but it needs to be in a way that is not sad for us, but bittersweet, I guess. That's how I see it ending.
See, I just didn't want to say that because I didn't want people to hate me. But I think what would probably be the most fitting is, like you said, getting them that heroic ending, that saving the world that one last time, and maybe this time they're going to save heaven as well. And what would be really cool is to see them in heaven with their parents as the children that they would have been had Mary Winchester not died.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to live out that life, the peaceful, happy, this is what you would have had you not lost your parents.
Yeah. Because it has to be that they die, but they get a reward for everything they've been through. Otherwise, we feel like it's gonna, if they don't get rewarded for what they've done, or if they just get back on the road and are doing it still, we're all gonna be like, well, it's such a depressing thought.
And I don't see them, going off and living happy lives with spouses and children and all of that, not while monsters still exist. And I can't see them killing off all of the monsters in the world, with this final ending. I really think that it's going to end up with them, dying and having that one thing that they've always wanted. Because if you think about it, it's already been set up. We know that Mary Winchester at the end of season 14 is in heaven with her husband, and that she's happy, that she's at peace. When Dean had the opportunity to get his heart's one true desire with the pearl, his father shows up, and they all sit down and they have that family meal. So I'm thinking that it's going to be something like that they finally get in the end.
I mean, I want to see them together, alive or dead. I want to see them together.
Oh, sure.
Not, let's mirror image Swan Song and have Dean die and Sam stick around, because Sam burns down the world when Dean isn't around, so this is not going to last. But they've set that up with Sam saying, and if we die, we'll do that together too. So I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I see them dying that heroic death, and then they were told they had a shared heaven, the whole soulmate thing. I want to see them in their shared heaven in the Impala, maybe at the Roadhouse, back with all their friends. Yeah,
I could see anything like that. I think, Teresa, when you were saying that, they shouldn't get married and all that, and they absolutely can't write that because they already tried. Like, there was a point where Dean was married and everything was perfect and idyllic, and he couldn't handle it,
Yeah.
There is
Sam too.
Yeah. Normal is so past these guys at this point. They've tried it. It never works. I think with all of the scars and history, there is really nobody else who's going to understand them at this point. When you wake up with that hell nightmare, who else is going to understand?
Right.
There is a piece of fan art that just always comes back to me when we talk about the ending. And there's one picture where it's very young Dean and Sam, and Dean's holding Sam's hand to cross the street, and he says, "Ready to cross?" And then there's the scene of them both adults lying in a pool of blood, and Sam says to Dean, "Ready to cross?"
That's cute. Yeah.
So
I just think we're gonna see like the Winchester mom and dad, and then two tow-headed little kids.
That could be, and our time is up, folks. This has run so fast, and thank you so much for being here with us. Last quick thing, tell us where to find you online.
I am on Facebook and Twitter as Teresa Glover. I'm pretty easy to find there. And then I also have my website, teresaglover.wordpress.com, or you can find my books and information on falstaffbooks.com.
And I'm social media wise, I mostly am on Facebook at Stuart Jaffe Author. And I have a website, stuartjaffe.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter. And I talk to my newsletter folks quite a lot, so that's another way as well.
I'm Gail Z. Martin, and as long as you remember the Z, you'll find me. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. This was fun.
Thank you
Thank
for having us.
you.